Imagine what would happen if two of the most powerful beings in the entire Jujutsu Kaisen universe were to merge in an unimaginable way. On one side, we have Raiman Sukuna, the king of curses, whose mere presence 1,000 years ago was enough to decimate the most powerful sorcerers of that golden era. On the other, there's Satoru Gojo, the prodigy who, upon his birth, changed the course of history, being the first in centuries to possess both the Limitless and the Six Eyes. From the first time these titans faced off, it was clear they were destined to be mortal enemies. But what if fate took an even darker turn? What if Sukuna decided to use Gojo's body as his vessel? Could such an absurd scenario even be possible? And if it happened, what would become of the world of Jujutsu Kaisen? How would the universe cope with the strongest sorcerer in history inhabiting the body of the strongest sorcerer of the modern era? If this idea has piqued your curiosity, get ready, because today we're going to explore exactly that. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. I think it's fair to start by analyzing whether this idea could even be possible. Right in Chapter 1, Megumi mentions that Yuji's chances of surviving after ingesting Sukuna's finger were 1 in a million. But we don't need to take those numbers literally. Jujutsu Kaisen is known for using nearly impossible odds to emphasize how difficult something is, like with the 0.0001 seconds of Black Flash. The main point is, people capable of serving as a vessel are extremely rare, and that's something crucial to remember. At the end of the Shibuya arc, Kenjaku had to use Idol Transfiguration, Mahito's innate ability, on everyone he forced to ingest cursed objects before removing the seals. Otherwise, they would have died, even if they had some predisposition to bear such a burden. Yuji's case is similar to these people. He was born with the full capacity to be Sukuna's vessel, but the circumstances of his birth and upbringing are shrouded in mystery. For anime-only fans, this might be surprising, as it's only been hinted at so far. But Kenjaku used Yuji's mother's body, just as he did with Geto's body. In the fight against Choso, Kenjaku mentions that Yuji had already fulfilled his role as a vessel. This makes it clear that Yuji's ability to be a vessel came from some manipulation by Kenjaku, though it hasn't been fully revealed whether this was through genetic selection, direct alterations to his DNA, or a combination of both. The point is, Yuji was artificially created for this purpose, and he's not the 1 in a million that Megumi mentioned. Ironically, the person who would best fit that statistic would be Megumi himself, even though he didn't realize it until it happened. Since the detention center arc, Sukuna had already shown a peculiar interest in the heir of the 10 Shadows, though at the time, the reason behind it wasn't clear. However, in one of the most critical moments of the plot, we learned that Sukuna's true goal was to use Megumi as his vessel. At the end of their fight, back in Chapter 9, Megumi begins to summon Maharaga, and even without completing the ritual, Sukuna realizes the immense potential of the 10 Shadows from that sudden spike in energy. Additionally, he notices Megumi's latent ability to act as his vessel. It was at this moment that Sukuna set his sights on Megumi. Understanding this issue of vessels, it becomes clear that Gojo wouldn't be a viable choice for Sukuna. The issue was never about strength but compatibility. While Gojo is the pinnacle of everything related to Jujutsu in the modern era, be it in terms of energy quantity or blessed genetics, we can't be sure if he could withstand having Sukuna inside him. Sukuna witnessed Gojo's strength up close many times, whether in their first confrontation or by observing everything through Yuji's eyes. Yet, Sukuna never expressed any intention other than to kill the most powerful sorcerer of modern time. One possible counterpoint is the extreme difficulty Sukuna would have in creating a favorable situation to switch bodies with Gojo and take full control. However, the explanation of compatibility still seems more likely. But to avoid ending the video here on such a short note, let's consider that Gojo wouldn't die from having Sukuna's finger inside his body. In this scenario, Sukuna would still face a significant problem: how to take control of the body. When Sukuna switched vessels, he explained that he waited until Megumi's soul was shattered so that the boy wouldn't suppress him, as Yuji had done. However, even making the switch at Megumi's most vulnerable moment, the boy was still able to suppress much of Sukuna's energy release, with Sukuna estimating that he couldn't even use 10 10% of his full power at that moment. While Megumi completely lost physical control to Sukuna, his soul, even in pieces, still managed to resist. An interesting detail here is that even in his fragile state, Megumi briefly managed to slow down Sukuna's body, something very subtle, which quickly dissipated. After the switch, Sukuna performed a ritual of immersion in negative energy and then killed the sorcerer Yorozu, who had possessed Megumi's sister's body, to completely plunge Megumi's soul into despair and annihilate his will to live, ensuring full control of the body. In Satoru Gojo's case, however, the idea of breaking his mind to that extent seems impossible. Considering Gojo as an adult, his moment of greatest emotional destabilization occurred when he saw Gedo's body in Shibuya, which lasted only a few brief seconds. Even after being sealed in a place where time didn't pass, Gojo didn't suffer any significant psychological impact, although he admitted that the experience was indeed horrific. Based on Sukuna's experiences with Itadori and Megumi, it seems that the tug-of-war between the original owner of the body and the entity trying to take over, like in Megumi's case, tends to favor the original owner. So, even if by some miracle Gojo survived Sukuna entering his body, it would be virtually impossible for Sukuna to fully take control of Gojo. Another interesting possibility to consider is a symbiotic relationship, where Gojo and Sukuna somehow decided to cooperate while sharing the same body, something similar to what happened between the Angel and Hana. To explain this better, the Angel is a reincarnated sorcerer from 1,000 years ago, a contemporary of Sukuna, who, due to his beliefs, opposes reincarnation because it results in the death of the vessel's consciousness. Instead of simply taking over Hana's body, he chose to create a symbiotic relationship. This symbiotic relationship has the potential to be far superior to the traditional relationship between a vessel and a reincarnated sorcerer. Instead of one soul suppressing and neutralizing the other, they help each other, while the physical control of the body remains with the original owner. Thanks to this partnership, Hana remains unconscious for much less time when knocked out, as the Angel actively works to bring her back. However, this symbiosis also has its downside. Hana, without the experience of a sorcerer, is naive and easily manipulated, almost getting killed by Sukuna after he took over Megumi's body. Now, imagine a symbiotic relationship like this between Satoru Gojo and Sukuna. Of course, in practice, it's impossible for Sukuna to help anyone but himself, and even more unimaginable that Gojo would accept such a situation, given both of their pride and their completely opposite ideals. Still, it's an intriguing hypothesis to consider. The only limitation of Gojo, if we can even call it that, is that he doesn't seem to have much knowledge about souls, unlike Sukuna, who can freely divide his soul and fully understands the subject, both from the experience of being turned into cursed objects in the past, and from living while sharing a body. This experience could be shared and used in battle. Additionally, Sukuna also has the ability to expand his domain without using a barrier, a technique considered divine, which has only been replicated by the millennial-old sorcerer Kenjaku. Now imagine a limitless void. Satoru Gojo's domain expansion, covering a 200-meter area, manifested without the use of a barrier. It would be an apocalypse. However, it's important to remember that we're talking about Satoru Gojo. He already has the best energy perception in the series, and probably the most powerful technique. Even with Sukuna's help, his power level wouldn't increase much beyond what we've already seen. But what really stands out in this idea, and could add even more depth to this discussion, is if Sukuna gained full control of Gojo's body, the consequences would be absolutely devastating for the Jujutsu Society. Let's consider the following assumption. Sukuna managed to make Gojo in just one of his fingers. Gojo not only survived but is also compatible, and somehow Sukuna managed to gain absolute control over Gojo's body, just as he did with Megumi. In this hypothetical scenario, we'd be facing the worst possible nightmare for the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. Throughout his existence, Sukuna has only experienced nervousness once, at the peak of his fight against Gojo. That was the closest Sukuna ever came to defeat. The subsequent resistance from Yuji and company was only possible due to the effects of that battle. Sukuna is an absolute genius when it comes to Jujutsu. Whether in barriers or innate techniques, he maximizes the potential of everything in his arsenal. Even Gojo was surprised by Sukuna's talent during the fight, like when he used the water of the maximum elephant without summoning it. That required a talent equivalent to Gojo, Sukuna is also a master of adaptation. In the second domain clash between the two strongest, Gojo notices that, in addition to using amplification and domain expansion simultaneously, Sukuna was gradually increasing his energy output and making the amplification more efficient. Basically, he was adapting, not just Maharaga. However, if we compare technique by technique, Gojo's Limitless, in combination with the Six Eyes, is far superior to Sukuna's unnamed innate technique. Although Sukuna does the basics extremely well and is incredibly versatile, Gojo's guaranteed hit from the Limitless Void is clearly a superior technique to Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. Of course, this analysis could change with the formal reveal of Sukuna's innate technique, but it's hard to imagine that it would be enough to justify the risk he took by using the 10 shadows in his fight against Gojo. The point is that Sukuna can put himself on the same level as Gojo, even without being blessed with a hereditary technique like the Six Eyes. Speaking of the Six Eyes, this is another crucial advantage of Gojo. Sukuna probably has a larger energy reserve, but it's undeniable that in terms of efficiency, a Six Eyes user is unbeatable. The energy loss when using techniques is so low that, in practice, it's as if a Six Eyes user has infinite energy. This, not to mention the nuclear level energy perception, which provides an unparalleled advantage in combat. Now, imagine what Sukuna could do with such powerful tools at his disposal. Just with Maharaga's adaptation model, Sukuna achieved a feat he himself admits was nearly impossible, altering his slashing technique so that his target was space itself, creating an indefensible strike even against Satoru Gojo's infinity. It's almost unimaginable what Sukuna could invent with the perfect vision offered by the Six Eyes, and the spatial manipulation of the Limitless. Giving the Six Eyes to someone who wasn't born with this innate trait is like giving sight to the blind. A true sea of new sensations, and a total shift in the perception of the world around him. It's also easy to imagine Sukuna creating new variations of the Limitless techniques that neither Gojo nor his ancestors could, just as he's always tried to innovate the use of the 10 shadows. However, it's important to remember that it's not possible to use two innate techniques simultaneously. While keeping Maharaga's Dharma Chakra active for adaptation, Sukuna only had access to the cuts imbued in his domain, so it wouldn't be possible to combine any of the brightness techniques with Dismantle, for example. But with the Six Eyes, it's different. The Six Eyes aren't an innate technique but a hereditary trait, so Sukuna could continue using his own innate technique alongside the heightened perception of the Six Eyes. That's why I can say with absolute certainty, Sukuna, with control of Gojo's body, would only lose to the rest of the cast if he wanted to. Yuta mentions that if it weren't for the aftermath of Sukuna's fight against Gojo, Sukuna would have annihilated him and Yuji without giving them even a chance to heal. All the plans to defeat Sukuna after Gojo's death were only possible because he was completely exhausted from the first battle. Now, imagine Sukuna with access to the Six Eyes. The gap between him and the others would be simply insurmountable. There wouldn't be a plan or strategy capable of closing the gap. When I say that Sukuna would only lose if he wanted to, it's not an exaggeration. Although he's not the type to lose on purpose, Sukuna enjoys challenging himself and fighting powerful opponents. It's not hard to imagine that instead of demolishing everyone with zero effort, he might choose to fight more limitedly to enjoy himself and pass the time. Of course, this still wouldn't be enough for him to lose, but at least it would provide some fight. However, the truth is unavoidable. In a reality where Sukuna had control of the Six Eyes, he would obliterate anyone who dared challenge him, even more brutally than he did in the Heian era, and without the difficulty he faced in defeating his challengers after the fight against Satoru Gojo. He would undoubtedly solidify himself as the King of Curses and the ruler of all Japan. So what did you all think of this video? In your opinion, what would happen if Sukuna possessed Gojo? Leave your thoughts in the comments, I'll be reading them all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can catch all our videos. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.